hunter saves a dying woman in the woods. Not knowing she is a millionaire, she falls madly in love. Before we get into this story, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Also, if you enjoy Millionaire CEO stories like these, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on the next one. Jack's boots crunched softly against the forest floor, the crisp leaves beneath his feet barely making a sound. The cool morning air mixed with the scent of pine and fresh earth, the quiet of the woods, a comforting escape from the chaos of the outside world. He had come to hunt, as he often did, to clear his mind and focus on nothing but the task at hand. The forest was his sanctuary, where everything slowed down and nothing mattered but survival. His eyes scanned the woods as he moved, his hand resting lightly on the rifle slung across his back. The quiet was perfect, too perfect. Then faintly he heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible whimper. Jack froze, his muscles tensing as he tried to make sense of the sound. He listened again, more carefully this time. The whimpering grew louder, mingled with the sound of someone gasping for air. "Help. Please." The voice came, weak and hoarse. His heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected to find anyone in the woods. He was miles away from the nearest town, and the only people who ever ventured this far were hunters like him, or the occasional wanderer who got lost. "Hello?" Jack called out cautiously, his voice low but carrying through the trees. He was careful to keep his movements steady, not wanting to startle whoever it was. He pushed through a thick patch of underbrush, eyes scanning the ground. There, just ahead, by the small campfire still smoking faintly, he saw her. A woman, lying on the ground, her body curled in a way that suggested pain. She was pale, sweat beading on her forehead, and she shivered despite the warm air. The remains of a small tent were nearby, barely standing. He approached cautiously, his instincts sharp. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, kneeling beside her. His heart thudded in his chest. The woman's breath was ragged, her skin clammy, but it wasn't just the fever that worried him. It was the mosquito bites, hundreds of them, scattered all over her arms, neck, and face. I don't know," she managed to whisper, her voice shaking. She opened her eyes for a moment, but they were clouded with fever. "Please, I need help. I can't." Jack didn't hesitate. He reached out, gently pressing his hand to her forehead, feeling the intense heat radiating from her skin. Her temperature was dangerously high. "Damn it," he muttered to himself, realizing what this could mean. The bites on her skin, the fever, it wasn't just exhaustion or a bad reaction. This could be malaria. His mind raced. He had seen it before, heard of it from travelers who came through the area. Malaria was common in these parts, especially in the summer months when the mosquitoes were more active. "Hang on, I'm gonna get you help," Jack said, trying to keep his voice calm even though panic was beginning to rise in his chest. He needed to act fast. Lila, weak and shivering, tried to say something, but it came out as a low, incoherent murmur. Jack's chest tightened. He needed to get her somewhere safe, somewhere he could tend to her properly. With all the strength he could muster, Jack gently lifted her, his arms wrapping carefully around her fragile body. He could feel the weight of her sickness, the way she collapsed into his chest, unable to hold herself up. As he began to move through the woods, the sound of her ragged breathing mixed with the steady crunch of his boots on the leaves. Jack's mind was focused, his heart pounding with a new urgency. "I'll get you through this," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "Just hold on." The journey through the dense woods had been a long, arduous one. Jack's muscles ached from the weight of Lila in his arms, but he couldn't bring himself to care. She was too fragile, too sick to leave behind in the wilderness. The forest, while beautiful, was a dangerous place for someone in her condition. The mosquitoes, the fever, and the isolation were enough to defeat even the strongest. So, with a sense of urgency, Jack had carefully carried her to safety. His small village nestled deep in the heart of the woods. The village was quiet, the kind of place where life moved slowly, each day folding into the next with a predictable rhythm. Jack's cabin, tucked away from the rest of the village, was small but solid, a shelter from the harsh elements, built with his own two hands. Wooden beams lined the walls, and the stone fireplace in the corner was always kept warm. It was a humble home, one filled with the scent of cedar and the constant crackle of the fire, but to Jack, it was a sanctuary. It was his world, It was where he found peace after long days spent in the forest. And it was here, now, that Lila would recover. Jack carefully laid Lila on his bed, adjusting the blankets around her with great care. She was burning with fever, her skin slick with sweat. The sickness had taken its toll on her already frail body. Her breath was shallow, her eyes barely open. Her lips were dry, cracked from dehydration, but Jack's focus never wavered. His hands, calloused from years of working the land and living in the wilderness, moved with surprising gentleness as he adjusted the covers around her. The sight of her like this, the woman who had been so strong and independent just days ago, was enough to stir something deep within Jack. He wasn't sure what it was, but he couldn't ignore it. It wasn't pity. He didn't feel sorry for her. He felt a responsibility, something instinctual that drove him to protect her at all costs. Jack's cabin wasn't large, but it was all he had. He didn't mind the cramped space. The simplicity of it gave him peace. The walls were adorned with a few worn, hand-carved pieces. A hunting knife here, a map of the forest there, but nothing too flashy, nothing that spoke of wealth or grandeur. And yet, as he sat by the fire, staring at Lila's fevered form, the weight of her presence in his home felt different. It was not the presence of a stranger. No, it was more. There was something about her vulnerability that called to him, something about her that stirred an unfamiliar tenderness in his heart. For the next few days, Jack did everything he could to care for Lila. The village was small, and resources were limited, but Jack knew the forest like the back of his hand. He had lived there his entire life, learning from his father and the elders of the village how to find the herbs and plants that could heal wounds, cure fevers, and offer relief to those who needed it most. Every morning, Jack would rise early. The first light of dawn would spill over the treetops, painting the sky with pale pinks and oranges. He would go into the woods to gather herbs, plants with medicinal properties that he had learned to identify over the years. He knew which leaves could ease fever, which roots would help with swelling, and which flowers would calm the nerves. He carefully boiled the herbs into a tea, bringing it back to Lila. She barely had the strength to drink it, but Jack gently held the mug to her lips, encouraging her to sip. As the days passed, Jack kept the fire going, the warmth filling the cabin and providing a constant comfort to her. The weather outside had grown cold, the winds rustling the leaves in the trees, but inside, it was warm. Jack made sure she had everything she needed: clean water, food when she could eat, and constant company. His presence was a constant source of comfort for her, though she could barely express her gratitude yet. Jack's attentiveness did not go unnoticed by Lila. The man who had saved her life was not just a hunter, not just a man living in the woods. He was something more, something deeper. His actions were simple, but they spoke volumes about who he was. Every morning, as soon as the sun rose, Jack would check on her. He would make sure the fire was stoked and would prepare fresh tea for her, even though he didn't drink it himself. He never complained, never hesitated. He simply did what needed to be done. He would sit by her bedside, quietly watching her as she rested. His presence was calm, steady. He didn't crowd her with questions or demands. He simply allowed her to heal at her own pace. There were days when she couldn't speak, when her fever was too high, and Jack would sit there for hours, doing nothing but watching the flames dance in the hearth, his eyes flicking between the fire and her peaceful face. At night, when she was able to stay awake for a bit longer, Jack would sit by her, telling her about the village, about the animals in the forest, about his life. He spoke of his childhood, of how he had grown up learning the ways of the land from his father. He spoke of the village, how the people worked together, how they lived off the land, and how much they meant to him. He didn't press her for anything, didn't demand that she tell him about her life. Instead, he let her talk when she was ready. As the days turned into weeks, Lila began to grow stronger. The fever finally broke, and the mosquito bites started to fade. Her energy began to return, though she was still weak, and she spent much of her time resting in bed, listening to Jack as he went about his daily tasks. It was in these moments, the small ones, when Jack went out of his way to make sure she was comfortable, that Lila found herself falling for him. She had spent most of her life in the world of wealth and status, surrounded by people who were interested in her because of what she could provide, not who she was. But here, in Jack's cabin, surrounded by the forest and the simple life he led, she felt seen for who she was, not for her money, not for her status. She noticed the little things about him, how he always checked the fire before he went to bed, how he would take care of his chores without complaint, how he never seemed to tire of looking after her. His quiet strength, his selflessness, it was everything she had never found in the people she had known before. In the quiet of the cabin, she began to see a side of Jack that was more than just the strong, stoic man she had initially met. He had a heart, a deep well of kindness that he kept hidden from most. It was in his actions, in the way he cared for her without expecting anything in return, that Lila found herself falling for him, slowly but surely. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the sky, Lila found herself sitting at the small table by the window. She had recovered enough to get up and move around the cabin, but her heart was heavy with a mixture of emotions she couldn't quite place. She had come to the woods seeking solitude and safety, to escape from the life she had left behind. But now, as she watched Jack move around the cabin, his rough hands cleaning up after their meal, something stirred deep within her. She wasn't sure when it had happened, but she realized she had fallen in love with him. It wasn't his wealth that had drawn her in. She had never cared about his lack of riches. It wasn't even his rugged handsomeness, though she could admit that it hadn't gone unnoticed. No, it was the way he treated her, the way he cared for her with no ulterior motives, the way he made her feel safe when the world outside had once felt so cold and lonely. She watched him for a moment, his back turned as he arranged firewood, and she felt her heart ache for him. He wasn't just a hunter. He was someone who had shown her what true kindness looked like. And for the first time in her life, Lila felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire burning in the hearth. Lila's recovery was slow but steady. Each day brought a little more strength, a little more clarity. The fever that had once consumed her finally broke, leaving behind only the lingering ache in her muscles from the days spent lying in bed. The mosquito bites that had once covered her body like a patchwork quilt were now just fading marks on her skin. She could move more freely now, taking small steps around Jack's cabin, but there was still a weariness that she couldn't shake. The peacefulness of the village and Jack's presence had allowed her to heal in a way she never thought possible. It was not just the physical wounds that had healed, but the emotional ones too. The life she had left behind, the corporate world, the pressure, the expectations, it all felt distant now, as though it had happened to someone else. Yet, as much as the village and Jack's care had given her comfort, there was a restlessness in her that grew with each passing day. The unease began to stir again, a familiar ache that she had ignored for so long. Her work, her research in the United States, and the life she had built, none of it seemed to matter in the same way. It was Jack, his quiet strength, his humility, and his unwavering care that had taken root in her heart. She had come to the forest seeking solace, but what she had found in Jack was something entirely different, something that had quietly seeped into her soul and began to change her. As she wandered down to the small stream near the cabin, the sound of the water rushing over the rocks below filled her ears. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting a golden glow across the surface of the water. She knelt at the edge of the stream, her fingers grazing the cool surface, lost in thought. "What do I do now?" She wondered aloud, her voice barely a whisper against the rustling leaves. The realization had come to her slowly, like a gentle wave creeping up the shore until it crashed into her all at once. She was in love with Jack. It wasn't a love born out of convenience, nor out of the luxuries she had known before. It wasn't the kind of love she had seen in the world she had left behind, the one that came with wealth, status, and expectations. No, this was something different. This was raw and unfiltered. This was a love that had grown in the simplicity of a life she never expected. In the quiet of a cabin surrounded by trees, in the small gestures Jack made without thinking. How he checked on her every morning, how he made sure she was comfortable, how he never hesitated to help her when she needed it most. But as much as her heart ached for him, Lila knew the truth. There was no future for them. Jack was a man of the earth, of simple means, with no desire for the life she had once known. He had no interest in wealth, no desire for the luxury and status that had once defined her world. He was content in his small village, in his cabin, surrounded by the forest he loved. And Lila, well, she wasn't like him. She had a life to go back to, a research project to complete, and responsibilities that called her away. It wasn't just about what she had to do, it was about who she was. She was a woman of ambition, a woman who had spent her life working to build something bigger than herself. She couldn't stay here, in the quiet of the woods, no matter how much she wanted to. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm golden light across the stream, Lila felt the weight of the decision settling in her chest. She had to leave. When Jack returned later that evening, the tension in Lila's chest had only grown. She had been rehearsing what she would say to him, but the words felt so much heavier than she had anticipated. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to fall for him in the way she had, but now that she had, she couldn't ignore it. She could no longer pretend that leaving wouldn't hurt. She had to go. For her future, for her life, for the work she had started. When Jack entered the cabin, his eyes immediately found her. He must have seen something in her expression because his face softened, and he approached her with a gentleness she had grown to cherish. "You're not feeling well?" he asked, his voice low with concern. He had always been in tune with her, always noticing when she was unsettled. It was one of the things she loved about him. Lila shook her head, the lump in her throat making it hard to speak. "Jack, I can't stay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He stiffened slightly, but he didn't say anything right away. Instead, he moved to the chair by the fire and sat down, his eyes not leaving her. His silence made the moment feel heavier, like he was waiting for her to explain, to justify her decision. "I've been thinking about it for days," she continued, her voice trembling. "I came here to escape, to find peace. But what I found was you. And now, I don't know what to do. You've made me feel things I've never felt before, but I can't stay. I have responsibilities, Jack, a life to return to, a future that's waiting for me." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Jack didn't move, he simply stared at her, his face unreadable. Lila's heart ached as she saw the hurt in his eyes. She didn't want to hurt him, but she had made her decision. She had to go back to her life, to the life that she had left behind when she found him. Jack finally spoke, his voice low and steady, though it cracked with emotion. "Go," he said, the word heavy. "If you need to go, then go. I don't want you to stay because of me, Lila. I can't ask you to give up your life. But what we had here, it meant something to me. It was real." Tears pricked at Lila's eyes. "I love you, Jack. I do," she whispered, barely able to hold it in. "But I can't stay. I have to go back." He nodded, his gaze softening, though the pain was still evident in his eyes. "I understand," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion lurking beneath. "I've never asked you to stay, Lila. You're free to go." The words settled in her chest, making her heart ache in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had never wanted to leave him. She had never wanted to hurt him. But in this moment, she knew it was the right choice. She needed to follow her own path, the one that would take her back to the life she had built before. But as she turned to leave, she knew that part of her would always remain with him, in the quiet cabin, by the fire that had kept her warm. 3 months had passed since Lila had left Jack. The days blurred together in a haze of research, lab experiments, and the weight of her duties. Yet no matter how much she threw herself into her work, no matter how much she tried to bury the thoughts of Jack in the sterile environment of the laboratory, she couldn't escape him. He was there in every quiet moment, in every fleeting thought, in the shadows of her mind. At night, the dreams came. In the quiet of her room, she would find herself drifting back to the cabin in the woods, to the fire that had burned steadily, to the sound of Jack's voice as he tended to her, the tenderness in his touch as he cared for her without asking for anything in return. She saw his hands, rough from years of labor, yet so gentle when they held her. She saw his eyes, steady and calm, as if he could see through all her layers, through the facade she had built over the years. Jack had seen her, truly seen her, Not just the wealthy, polished version of herself, but the vulnerable woman who was lost, who didn't know where she fit into the world. With him, she had felt accepted. For the first time in her life, she had felt like she mattered. But in the 3 months that had passed since her departure, all of that had weighed heavily on her. Every evening, as she worked in the lab, she found herself distracted, lost in thoughts of him. She couldn't shake the way her heart had clenched when she walked away from him. The truth was undeniable. She loved him. She had fallen for him, for the simple, beautiful life he led, for the way he had made her feel like she could be more than just her title or her wealth. There was no more denying it. So, after weeks of internal conflict, Lila made a decision. She would return to Jack's village. This time, it wouldn't be about her work or her research. It would be about following her heart. It was time to stop running from what she felt. She was ready to build something with Jack, to leave behind the world of expectations and live the life she had found in the woods. The thought of returning to the village filled her with both excitement and fear. She didn't know what would happen, but she knew she couldn't go back to her old life. Not when her heart had already chosen him. The journey back to the village felt different this time. The roads that had once felt foreign now seemed familiar, and the landscape outside the window of the car had begun to feel like home. As the car slowly wound its way through the dense forest, Lila's heart pounded in her chest. She tried to steady her breathing, but the anticipation was too much. Her palms were sweaty, her thoughts scattered. It had been 3 long months. Would Jack still be the same? Would he accept her decision, or would he resent her for leaving him? What if she had waited too long? What if he had moved on? When the car finally pulled up to the village, Lila's eyes scanned the familiar surroundings. The air was thick with the earthy scent of pine and fresh leaves. She could hear the distant sounds of the forest, birds calling to one another, the rustle of the leaves as the wind moved through the trees. But it was the sight of the cabin that made her chest tighten. There, just beyond the clearing, stood the small house where she had spent the most transformative days of her life. Lila took a deep breath, her heart racing, and stepped out of the car. The moment her feet hit the ground, she felt as if time had paused. She stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do, but then the cabin door creaked open. And there he was. Jack stood in the doorway, his eyes searching the yard, as if he had been waiting for her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Their gazes met, and everything else in the world faded away. It was as if the distance between them, the 3 months of silence and separation, had never existed. The years of emotional distance, the barriers that had once felt insurmountable, melted away in that one look. Jack's expression softened, his lips parting in disbelief. The weight of his emotions was clear in the way his shoulders tensed, his gaze never leaving her. "Emily," he whispered, her name escaping from his lips like a prayer, soft and full of hope. Lila's heart stopped for a moment. She hadn't heard her name spoken like that since she had left. The way he said it, like she was the only thing that mattered in that moment, made her heart ache. "Jack," she breathed, her voice shaky as she stepped forward. Every word that had been swirling in her head was now lost. There was no more holding back. "I couldn't forget you. I've been thinking about you, about us, about everything we shared. I love you, Jack. I can't imagine my life without you anymore." The words spilled out before she could stop them. They had been buried for so long, hidden behind layers of doubt and fear. But now, in this moment, they felt as if they had always been there. Jack's breath hitched in his chest. His eyes glistened with emotion as he watched her, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then, with an almost desperate urgency, Jack crossed the distance between them, pulling her into his arms. His embrace was strong, protective, and full of warmth. He held her as if he had feared this moment would never come, and now that it had, he wasn't about to let her go. "I've been waiting for you," Jack whispered, his voice filled with raw emotion. "I love you too, Lila. I never stopped thinking about you." Tears welled in Lila's eyes as she closed them, letting herself sink into the moment. She had never expected this, never expected to return and be met with such unconditional love, with such an open heart. She had thought she might be too late, that he would have moved on, but here they were, wrapped in each other's arms. And then, with a tenderness that only Jack could give, he kissed her. It was soft at first, a tentative brush of lips, but it quickly deepened, both of them pouring everything they had into the kiss. All the longing, all the months apart, everything they had both fought so hard to deny, it was all laid bare in that moment. For once, neither of them had to hide. They had found each other, not through the world's expectations, not through their backgrounds, but through the quiet, simple truth of their hearts. If you enjoy Millionaire CEO stories like these, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on the next one.